135,000, 8,035,000 polling stations, 1.3 million electronic voting machines, 3 million civilian staff, 8 million paramilitary supportive staff. And we were able to do our election as we did because we are a large country in phases. It took time, it took 5 weeks, but we counted our result within a day. And on the promised day, 2 days later, when I had to go to the president with the list, I went to the president. The only thing is, I did have to apologize because I was half an hour late. Instead of reaching there at 6 p.m. as I promised her many days before, I reached at 6:30, but she forgave me. So we were able to complete, it was not just a question of completing, there was complete acceptance of the result in India. Isn't that a big thing? And if I were to take you to other countries that I won't name, where per capita incomes are much higher than ours and where they think that their democracy is just a little superior, they've had sit-ins. The losing party will sit in the main squares, not for a few days and weeks, but for months, even a year. And the institutions of the land, whether it's the Election Commission or whether it's the Supreme Court, take more than a year and a half to give a judgment. Until then, a political party is occupying the main squares of the capital city. These are all reported matters. This hasn't happened in India. There were other things that I want to say about, and this involves you. Every vote matters. Your vote matters as well. And may I just digress from this lecture to make it interactive with your permission, sir, for 1 minute to ask you how many of you have voted in the elections? Please raise your hands just for my information. That's fantastic. I would congratulate you all. And now I'll tell you why your vote matters. Just before the 2008 assembly elections, I asked our people, our law people and all, have there been cases where people have lost or won by one vote? And lo and behold, in that 2008 election, there were 2 such cases. So there was one celebrated case in Rajasthan where somebody lost by 1 vote. I think had he won, he would have certainly been the chief minister of the state. Later on, his wife was to lament that she did not vote. Voting is important. And a few days later, there was another case. And in Madhya Pradesh, where a vote took place. But the important thing is that although there was a recount, there was an acceptance of that result. And although there was an election petition, there will be an acceptance of its outcome whenever it comes. These two are our strengths. Let me take you a little to something else that we discovered with technology. We discovered, sir, that with computers and GI mapping, we could begin to find out which villages or parts of urban areas or parts of towns or which tolas, which is a part of a village, hadn't voted for long years. So we looked at the computers and we got the data very quickly and we found that that part of the village hasn't voted and that part of the village hasn't voted, and we wanted to know why. So sometimes it was a matter of geography. You could be in Himachal Pradesh and a bridge had broken down and the people who couldn't cross that bridge couldn't go 5 kilometers, walk that way and 5 kilometers this way to cast a vote. So using the powers of the Election Commission, we would try and get that bridge put in, repaired or put back into order, so that there was one very small component was the geographical component. But the larger component was that even now, the upper castes could oppress the lower castes in a situation which should be casteless. So what we did was that we devised this concept which we began to call vulnerability mapping. And this is also one of the strengths of the Election Commission, that it can devise these means. And it's not that the idea struck me, it struck some of our brightest officers who were working with me. And so what we did, and let me illustrate it for you sort of visually. It was as if one village was there, and then there was a second village there, and a third village there, but the polling station there. So people had to walk across those villages in order to be able to reach the polling station. And if they were from a depressed community, they were frowned upon or intimidated in some way from reaching across. So what we basically did was that we left the polling station where it was, but devised something called an auxiliary station and put it there. Put it on the doorstep. And then people came out to vote. And the percentages went up. And many people told us that it was the first time their families had even voted after independence. And that began to also change the geophysical, the geopolitical nature, not just of voting, but how communities could now freely come out to vote. And it made a dramatic change in many of the results. We learned from this, we put it in other state elections, and so by the time we came to the 2009 general election, I felt the need to put in 100,000 such auxiliary stations. And by that, we helped to change the landscape of voting so that those pockets that felt intimidated would no longer feel intimidated. Then we had wonderful observers. And for the ladies in the room, I have to say that our lady observers were always the best. So when on the day of polling even, they would look down the list, the electoral register, and if they would find that whole communities were not coming, they would go there and say, why aren't you coming? So if people had a problem with the local councillor or they had some local anger, that was a different matter. But if they were intimidated, they were assisted to come to vote. So slowly we began to change that landscape also of voting. There are many downsides in our democracy. The biggest downside are the insecurities that we have. The insecurity of hunger, the insecurity of habitation, the insecurity of sanitation, the insecurity of being homeless. These are insecurities. And as we evolve, and as we grow as an economy and as a country, those insecurities will lessen. Where we were in 1951 and 52 at our first election and where we are now is a different world altogether. Today we see young people, practically everybody has a mobile phone in his hand. I travel widely in the country, people are better dressed, better fed. The regions that I go to, and my wife and I have often traveled into those parts together, we find that over 30 years of traveling, people are better dressed, they are better fed. Everyone seems to be connected. It's a revolution. We've lost many revolutions. We were never part of the Industrial Revolution, but because of Rajiv Gandhi's vision, we never lost the communication revolution. We didn't lose the computer revolution. So at least these are two recent revolutions of which we are a part, and they have made a difference. But recently I went to Mexico City to attend a 3-day conference. And my 2 sessions were democracy in poor countries. So there it was a question of per capita income. India has a per capita income of $1,500, that country has a per capita income of $25,000, the US might have it of $50,000. And yet, in spite of our poverty, we have still not made a mockery of our democracy. We have not. And I'm going to give you reasons again why we have not. Because of our constitution, because of the wise stewardship of somebody like Jawaharlal Nehru, our first Prime Minister. He built up the institutions, he didn't interfere in them. He didn't allow the executive to interfere in the courts or into the building of the All India services like the IPS, the IAS, the Foreign Service. He built up these institutions, he built up the Election Commission. And because of that early nurturing of these institutions. And remember, a great deal of wisdom of the freedom struggle went into this, into that bhavna that we had in those early days of Dr. T.A. Pai. He was that same, made of the same mold of integrity and ethics that would come into the cabinet in due course in those early years. And into that, what also happened was that as we went into election after election, the system that existed before, which was a system of a dynamic of tension between communities, had to become instead replaced by reconciliation. You can't very well go out to ask for a vote and expect to do it through a system of oppression. You have to beg. You have to beg for a vote. And in that begging, you have to reach from door to door, no matter whose door it is. Whether you ate in that door before or entered, you would do it now because that vote is going to help you win. And so we moved towards, in many ways, we haven't reached perfection by any means, but in many ways, caste began to matter even less. A group of students asked me a little while ago about the Aam Aadmi Party and what I thought about it. Well, you know, I am not an astrologer. I don't know whether they will succeed, whether they will have the methods of governance and all that. But what I have seen is that they have defeated the two big malaises of what we have been suffering. One is money power and one is muscle power. Here, under the eyes and the glare of the national media in Delhi, a political formation comes out of Anna Hazareji's fast and his Andolan and his civil protest. Out of that is born a political formation, and that political formation decides to fight an election. In the course of fighting that election, there is no money power. They all spend below the statutory limit of 16 lakhs for an assembly election. There is no muscle power. Nobody is intimidated. There is no division of caste or creed or class or religion. There is no matbhed in this election. It's not that I'm not speaking here as a representative of the Aam Aadmi Party, far from it. I'm not a representative of any political formation. I'm speaking for clean elections. And suddenly a formation arising out of nowhere, but arising under the nose in the national capital, sweeps a national capital and therefore gets worldwide attention, not just India-wide attention. But for me, the lesson is that it's a clean election. It's not a muscular election. There's no intimidation. There's no threat. There is a connect. When we had our first elections in 1951-52, Dr. Pai, and subsequently the other elections, there was a connect with people. You did not require to pay to get crowds. There was no rent a crowd. You didn't require muscle to drive people out of their houses because it was so soon after the freedom struggle that people wanted to vote and to participate in governance and government making. And suddenly we get a glimpse of that again. Whether it lasts or not doesn't matter, but its example has been picked up elsewhere. Everybody is trying to follow something. Take some leaf out of the book. Austerity measures. A lack of lal batti. Take out the lal batti culture. Remove some of the security. Sit in a secretariat. Take decisions. Don't be royal about it. So, if these are some of the outcomes of what this election has shown, whether the formation lasts or not, as I said, I can't say. But this is the lesson, because there was no need for a special connect, because those who were elected and those who participated belonged to the same mahalla, they belonged to the same neighborhood. That is the one imperfection in our electoral society that we need to overcome. This business of excessive money power. We have to put that genie back into the bottle and spend what we are statutorily supposed to do. As you said, sir, we have many more crorepattis in parliament and many more criminals in parliament than that we need. And it is true that if elections continue to become so expensive, then we will have converted ourselves from a democracy to something like an oligarchy. So we have to go back to where our roots were. We can't keep raising the statutory limits. You can't say that it was 10 lakhs yesterday, we'll make it 16 lakhs today, tomorrow we'll make it 32, then we'll... If you keep raising the statutory limits, then you're increasingly getting only very rich people and encouraging them. If, like in an American presidential system, you remove the statutory limit altogether, then we are completely an oligarchy. Only the very richest can even enter the portals of a parliament or a legislature. And then where is the representation? And so that is why this victory is important in my eyes, because if this can be emulated elsewhere in the 2009 general elections, where we don't have to chase as an election commission and its observers